2019, and I have with me Brett Farrell, a spirit release therapist. He's also a real-life Ghostbuster, mostly for the individual. In this interview, we are going to discuss Brett's work with children and with adults as well, and how he does his work. So, hello Brett, welcome.
Hi Joy, thank you.
Yeah. First of all, Brett, can you elaborate on what it is you do as a spirit release therapist?
Certainly. I release or evict dark spiritual energies from people and entities from people, both actually. The dark entities are determined to destroy people's lives, and the dark energies can sometimes be generated as by the person themselves, or they can be transmitted from another person to them as a psychic attack, basically. So they're two of the main things I do. The other probably element of it is I work with earthbound individuals that are human beings that have died, and instead of moving on to the next realm, they attach themselves to another living person, and sometimes that causes quite a bit of trouble.
Okay, so these entities can come from various sources. So some are external, as in some are from people that have died, and some are entities floating around that are dark, and others could be thought forms that's generated from the individual.
Yeah, it can be a thought form that's generated within the person themselves, like anger or something, can actually, if it's developed over enough time, can become almost like a subpersonality that will take over the individual sometimes. And like sometimes someone will get in a rage and act out that rage, and then later on not remember what they were doing when they were in that state. Well, that's because that subpersonality of rage took over and it was in charge, and then when it ceases to be in charge, the rest of the person can't remember what was going on because they weren't in charge then, you see. So it operates that way. And also, like someone wants to put a curse on you, they can send an energy, they can create an energy form and send it to you that will, I can see as an energy form within your body, and I can send it back and get that sorted out. When an individual dies and attaches, it's not that they send something to you, it's the person's spirit themselves enters your body and resides with you as an earthbound entity. And I have to treat them quite differently to the thought forms or the dark entities.
So does the individual have to give permission for that entity to attach to them?
No, they don't know it's happened most of the time. Not at all.
Right.
No. They find out indirectly by... sometimes they don't find out till they come here, and I'm working with them, but people turn up here usually because they've got something going wrong in their lives. They're feeling blocked, or they're lacking confidence, or everything's going wrong, or they can't, got insomnia, and they're just feeling generally lost in the world or something, and then we find some of these things operating in them quite often. Not always, but quite often.
Oh, okay. Interesting. And how do you combine this with the clinical hypnotherapy?
I don't do, I still do hypnotherapy with them, but in a very mild fashion, because first I work with the clearing of the entities, because if we don't, that will undermine any other therapeutic work we do, because especially dark entities will be working against what I want to do, because they don't want the person to get well. And if someone's been cursed, well, the person who curses them doesn't want them to get well either. So I clear all that out first, and then we will look at the personality issues the person's got, which they will have, because if you've got entities in you like that, they're altering your behaviour. And then the longer they're in you, the more they tend to alter your behaviour. And the problem is the person who's experiencing this just considers that behaviour to be theirs. They don't realise some of it's being imposed upon them. Right. So they'll go to the doctor and get medication, or they'll just put up with it and say, well, that's the way I am, and in fact that's not just the way they are. But once we've cleared that out, I have to work with them quite often to to help them readjust to not having those entities in, and to get their confidence back maybe. And also you'll find that people that have attachments often have troubled childhoods. That's the things that have made them vulnerable in their childhood or in their earlier life, have made them vulnerable to attachment. Those issues have to be worked through so that they can not be vulnerable in the future. And because those issues are troubling them from a subconscious level, any issue you suppress into the subconscious bubbles to the surface eventually and has to be dealt with, or it's acted out in behaviour that's a bit distressing quite often. So that has to be dealt with as well. So we combine the two in that respect.
Okay, I see. So there's quite a lot of blockages. I guess they're blocks to that person progressing.
Yes. And a lot of people come in and actually say that. They say, I feel blocked, can't do anything. Yeah.
And would you say that it's very common then, if entities can attach, or the subpersonalities, most people would have them?
I don't know whether most people do or not. Most of my, probably more than 50% of my clients do, but then they're not representative of the general community. So I don't know what the prevalence is in the general community, but it's much higher than people imagine. Most people don't even think about it, but it's quite prevalent.
Yeah. And quite a few of your clients are children.
Yep.
Yeah. What ages do you work with?
I think the youngest I work with is about 7 or 8.
Okay.
Yeah, up to teenagers. Yes. Yeah.
And what are some of the common issues?
With the young ones, the very young ones, like 7 or 8, and it's nearly always behavioural issues. They're kicking, screaming, fighting, or they're terrified, won't go to school, can't get to bed at night, want mum to be lying with them in bed before they'll go to sleep. I even had one child that had to have a parent lying with him all night. They'd been doing that for quite some time. And they're the main things. It's just frightened or being bullied as part of it too, and it just not being, because they're so frightened, they're not socialising very well either, that type of thing.
Can you give a case example?
Yes, I had a child that a client that was in that situation, and there were psychic sort of events taking place in the house as well, and it was quite a complicated case actually, because I found that there was an entity in the house which I got rid of, and then there was in the bedroom of the child I found this sort of little old man, and the child had come from a tribal background, and in that tribe the shaman, I guess you would call him, held the tribe together energetically and psychologically. He was the focal point. It was almost like tribal life is very different to city life in a Western society, that the tribe almost is one person, and this man held the tribe together, and this child had been a member of that tribe, and this man was there holding him in that space still, you see. So I explained to him that it wasn't appropriate anymore, and he left. So that was another one he got rid of. But I also found that the child had seen a film and it had a monster in it that had scared him about a year before, and his father said he'd never been the same afterwards. And the child had then turned this monster into a bigger monster, and when I actually went, because I was working remotely, went into the bedroom and saw this, it was just a big black thing that filled the whole bedroom, and it had 2 big red eyes peering down on him, and I thought, I wouldn't be real happy going to bed by myself either if I had that in the room.
Yes.
So I got rid of that thing, and he started to get better after that, yeah.
Wow. So do you think we should be more mindful with children watching movies that have very scary themes because they're so open?
I think so. Quite young children especially, and if they are going to, I think you'd probably be a really good idea to have them sitting on your knee and let them know that they're safe or something like that, because I think it taps into any other general a sense of unsafety for the child in the family, because quite often the kids I work with, one of the themes that tends to come up and is that the child feels alone within the family. And it can be from outside, it appears to be a very tight family unit, but in fact it's not impossible for one of the kids to feel very isolated within that unit, even psychologically and emotionally isolated.
Right.
Even if he's getting cuddles from his mum, he can still feel, that his concerns aren't addressed, or he's frightened to speak up about what's really worrying him, that sort of thing.
Okay.
So I think if parents can, sometimes I have to counsel parents in relation to the child and ask them to suggest rather than they alter their behaviour in some way. And it's usually about creating a comfortable and open space for the child to talk to them about what's going on, and for them to talk to the child in a supportive way, not necessarily just saying everything's all right, but actually, because what I often do is, but actually offering suggestions, what I often do is I'll at a remote level tune into the child's subconscious and do some work, and then make some suggestions and put things in place. Then I will tell the mother, and I'll say to the mother, now, if you suggest that he does such and such, he'll probably be quite receptive to that, because I've already informed his subconscious mind that that's what he should do.
Oh, I see. And what's the outcome?
Works pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it works pretty well. Yeah,
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. I just remember, just in terms of kids feeling isolated and watching movies, and I remember being my mother took me to see this scary movie. I think I was 7, called The Beyond, and you had this blind girl that lived in a house, and she went under the stairs. It was like the 7 gates to hell or something like that.
Yes,
and I had nightmares afterwards, but I think maybe adults forget that it is so scary as a child, and nobody really explains it, or they say, oh, don't be silly, that's just a movie. And
I think what happens too is that a child gets that image in his mind, and then even if the child doesn't think about it a little bit, the subconscious mind picks up and builds on it. It's like when you can give someone a false memory by doing that. You put an idea in there, and the subconscious mind starts adding other bits to it to fill out the picture, because the subconscious mind likes things to be complete. So the monster can get bigger and bigger and more fearsome without the child doing a great deal about it sometimes. So it works that way.
And your cases of bullying, have you had any parents bring you children who were bullied?
A few, yes. It's often a question of helping the child develop self-esteem, and also equipping them with ways of dealing with the bullying in situ. In other words, telling them what sort of things they can say or do in that state. But also it's about, ultimately, bullying doesn't happen to everyone. It happens to vulnerable kids. So really I'm always looking to decrease their vulnerability in the eyes of other people, which means making them feel more powered within themselves, because the person that feels self-empowered gives off an energy that deters bullying, basically.
Yes.
So that's the main thing there. And plus I've talked to parents, but most parents are onto it and already at the school. But it's more I do those things. I give the child tools to handle a situation, but I'm constantly working at boosting their self-esteem and their confidence, so they feel okay. Like I might bring in a superhero that they watch with their fans in, and we'll get them to work with a superhero, and he'll help them work through these things and that sort of stuff. So what would he say? Well, sometimes we put the superhero in an empty chair over there, and I write superhero on a bit of paper and put it there, and then I put the kid over here and I sit over here, and we might put the bully in the other chair, and we talk to the superhero, and I say, ask him what he'd do about this situation, and he'll have a chat. And he says, you say you do this. I say, well, that sounds pretty good. Why don't we try that out next time? Why don't you try that? And we work that way, sort of.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And imaginary friends, are some entities good?
I had one kid that his parents said that he had a whole bunch of what he called sisters with him when he was younger, and I tuned in and I found that they'd been actually relatives in an earlier lifetime, and they'd popped in to see how he was going and support him. I was comfortable with that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think sometimes they're real, sometimes they're not.
Okay. How can you tell?
Well, if I go in and have a chat with them and they're there, I know they're real.
Yes.
But I don't really care either way, to tell you the truth. It's irrelevant. Probably mostly they are, but it doesn't matter, because if the child's producing them and they're positive playmates, that's a positive thing, and it's a supportive and developmental thing for the child, so it's good. But I suspect most of them are real anyway. Yeah.
Wow, interesting. And yeah, but before you were talking about entities influencing people, and sometimes, like in a fit of rage, they forget what they've done, and I'm just thinking sometimes people get so intoxicated that they forget. I know physiologically the substance has a effect on that, but how common do you think with substance abuse and alcohol abuse that entities influence that person to be stuck in that addiction?
I think it's common. They are attracted to that, and also when someone is high or drunk, it makes them very vulnerable to attachment. Their entities can slip in very easily, because when you're in good health and you've got a fairly positive state of mind, your aura is quite strong, and entities just can't jump in like that. They can't do it. But if you're shocked, or you're depressed, or you're unconscious from alcoholic intake, they can just slip in very easily. And if you fall down unconscious from drinking in a bar, if an entity slips in you, then it's probably an ex-alcoholic that's come in and wants to enjoy alcohol vicariously through you. And I've had that happen. I remember I worked with a woman once that was an alcoholic, a young woman, and on the first session I'm doing a clearing, and an old lady stuck her head out from a girl's abdomen and asked me to stop, and I said she was an alcoholic, and I said no, and anyway sent her to the light eventually. But the next time the young girl came in, I said, "How are you going?" And she said, "Oh, well, I haven't been drinking much this week, you know." I said, "Well, you're only drinking for one person now. You're not drinking for two."
Yes.
yeah. So that can happen. Yeah, but also the sometimes it appears that the drugs themselves sometimes almost have a spirit of their own, and I think you've got to watch that, because I suspect. This is just sort of theorising a little bit here, but I suspect that when people stop using but still have a craving like a year down the track or something, it's because the spirit of the substance is still there. It can also be because they were using the drug or the alcohol to cover up a trauma of some sort in their childhood, or and that trauma hasn't been dealt with, so that when it starts to surface, they get the craving again. For another cigarette or another drink or whatever it is. But so it can be a number of, it's not always cut and dried. Not everything's from spirits, you know, and rage doesn't always come because we've got an attachment. It can come just because we're really not dealing with our lives very well, and we're blaming other people and getting angry about it. Or we've been, abused when we were young and feel angry about it. So
it's a lot of unresolved issues that we push down, and that can make us vulnerable.
And that's why I combine the two. So I do the spirit release work, and I do the psychotherapeutic work as well. So
how did this ability develop, Brett, of seeing entities, being able to talk to them, seeing what's around that individual that's not in the 3D?
Well, was always interested in meditation as a means of discovering the essential self, the real self. Because when I was young, I used to look at adults and think what a bunch of dills most of them were, and even the smart ones did stupid things. And I thought, the idea that there's a person in there that is smart and doesn't do stupid things was appealed to me, like the higher self or the Atman or whatever one you want to call it. So I read about enlightened men, and I thought I want to be one of them. I'm still working at it, and so that was my goal. That was my pathway, and I spent a lot of time in meditation. Then I came across A Course in Miracles, actually, and that taught me to work with my higher self, and that became that's still my modus operandi. I work with my higher self.
Okay.
So, and that the meditations I did around that eventually gave me certain experiences, but the actually seeing entities in people occurred quite late in life, actually, and and under fairly dramatic circumstances. The first time I ever saw one in a human being, it was a personification of rage, and it was really, really angry and screaming at me and very upset with me. And I guess looking back, the surprising thing was, well, one, I wasn't surprised because I'd had enough psychic experiences to think, well, to not be shocked by anything, basically. And but on the other hand, I just intuited, without even thinking about it, this thing was screaming at me, and I jumped off. I jumped out of my body, and I just went round. And I was seeing it not in a physical body of a person. I saw the astral body of a client from where I worked there in front of me, and I just jumped out of my body, ran around and started wrestling with this thing, and I pulled it out.
Right.
Wrapped it up in light, which I didn't think about this. I just found myself doing it, and I'd never. I wrapped it up in light, and then I thought, where do I take it to? And then next, I'm taking it. And then I thought, I've got to go up with it. And I took it up, and they showed me a place to put it where it couldn't come back, and I attached to the client. And then I went to work the next week, saw this client, and they were considerably calmer.
Okay.
And I thought, this is really interesting, but like that all just happened like that. Now, I can only assume that all the years of meditation I've done, what I'd read and learned, had prepared me in some way for that, because it was, looking back, it was a pretty dramatic action to take,
Yeah, and it seemed like you sort of knew what to do, or you said they showed you the light.
I just knew what to, they didn't show it to me. I just found myself doing it, and I thought, well, someone once mentioned to me that maybe you've done this before in another lifetime. Maybe I have, I don't know, but it just sort of was there, and I guess there was an aspect of me, rather than be frightened, to jump in there and say, you can't push me around.
Yes. Have you ever had a physical teacher, or did you learn all this through? No, I've
never had a physical teacher. I've been to one or two psychic development classes.
Yeah.
Because they give me the opportunity to actually practice with other people, without not clients, that just to do mediumship work and psychic readings and things like that, to develop the skills a bit. So that's been valuable. But no, I've never had a teacher as such. I've learned from books.
Okay.
I tend to be a reader.
What about your higher self and other etheric entities? Do you communicate with them? Do they teach you? Or?
I've communicated with Arcturians once or twice, and I've communicated with Pleiadians once, but I don't have guides as such, and I don't. My higher self is my guide. If I'm not sure what to do, I ask my higher self. I say, what do I do here? And it tells me what to do. I sort of figure, I see relying on guides, no matter how, or masters or whatever they are, no matter how elevated they are, can be, I personally think it can be self-defeating, because my goal is to become an enlightened being. Yes. And I won't become enlightened if I just spend my time being a servant to a master, or doing what someone else tells me to do.
Yes.
The difference is my higher self is me, and the more I align myself with my higher self, the closer I am towards the enlightenment that I'm after.
Okay.
And the more I get Archangel Gabriel or whatever to work with me, the more I'm getting Archangel Gabriel to work with me, and I'm not getting enlightened necessarily.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow. So this is like you're developing into and practicing to be the ascended, to be in that...
to be what we're all going to be eventually.
Yeah.
We're all going to get there. We're going to stop having physical bodies and incarnating on planet Earth because we'll ascend beyond that. But I'm in a hurry.
Yeah, you're in a hurry.
But it's a slow hurry.
Things happen very slow in this plane. So do you work mostly from the other dimension, like the astral or the fourth dimension, or what, like how do you conceptualize?
I really, in my own mind, I conceptualize it, because I trained as a hypnotherapist, I conceptualize it in that way, because I don't do a lot of straight, heavy, deep hypnotherapy work anymore with people. I just put them into a light, relaxed, very light trance state, and that's enough, and it's quicker. So when people are in a trance state, they go into an altered state of consciousness. Basically, they might just drop down from beta into alpha, and sometimes a bit deeper. And I figure that's what I do when I do remote work. I drop myself down into an altered state in which I can visit the client and see the place or the house or that I want to clear or whatever it is, and that's enough. I don't bother about whether I'm in another dimension or whatever. I do what works, basically.
Okay.
I'm pretty goal oriented in that respect. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I trust that my higher self gives me the opportunities I need to do the next step. It's a question of trust and faith. A lot of it, you see.
Yeah.
Because your ordinary conscious analytical mind is usually at the service of the ego, which is not going to enlighten you. It's doing exactly the opposite, actually.
Yes. Okay, so faith and trust in your inner...
In my higher self.
In your higher self.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. I think that's all where we all should aim to be.
Well, I think that works for me, and I mean other people. Want. I mean, Christians have the Holy Spirit, don't they? And it's basic. I think that's the same. Only I think most Christians see the Holy Spirit as being separate from them.
Yes.
It's not. It's part of them.
Yeah.
And everything. We're all part of everything. We're actually, and I guess we're getting off the line of ghost busting here. But I think the problem is that most of us see ourselves as separate from the spirit world.
Yes.
And separate from God.
Yes.
And we're not.
Yes.
We're part of the spirit world.
Yes.
We're just a bit more physical than most of the spirit world, and we're actually part of the mind of God. We're not separate from God. He didn't make us like a potter makes a cup and puts it on a table and says, "There, I've made a cup," and is separate from the cup. We're part of the mind of God. We're walking in the mind of God when we go out. When we sleep, we're sleeping in the mind of God. We're part of it, and this is what we have to come to understand eventually.
Okay.
We're not separate. Everything we do and think affects everything else around us. We think we can think thoughts that don't affect anyone else. We can't.
Yes.
We can't.
Yeah. And do you think we sort of know this on an unconscious level? And sometimes we just dismiss it, like we know that. We can pick things up, or we see things that from the corner of our eyes, or we pick things up, but we kind of dismiss it because the ego or the intellectual says, "Oh no, that's not real."
I think that's quite often the case, yes, and we get ideas about this and that, and we think, "Oh, I just thought that up. It doesn't mean anything," and yet, I mean, probably everyone's had that experience of of thinking, "Oh, I should go and do this," and then someone else goes and does it, and you think, "Oh, right, that would have really worked," or in the simple thing like you think of someone and they give you a call on the phone 2 minutes later, and I find this a lot with clients. I think of a client, and then sure enough, they ring me the next day, or something like that. Yeah, so I'm picking that up, and it's registering, and it's up to my conscious mind to take notice of that registration.
Yes. And I get stories too from my clients especially if they've had a loved one that passed away.
Yep.
And there's so many stories that does not make sense in the physical physics as we know it, where they get phone calls and from the deceased. Just really paranormal stories. But then I guess we kind of dismiss it because we don't have the framework or to go on, because we're taught that's in the scientific field we're taught that that's not real.
It's not real, no, and it is real. When I have grieving parents, it's usually parents for children, I actually put them in touch with the child and give them a chat with the child. It helps them a lot, and I encourage them to believe that that's real and that they can make this contact. I said, do you dream about him much? Yes. I said, well, he's probably visiting you at that time. That's probably not just a dream. So,
yes.
And I think we need to accept this more and more, that these things are a reality, and you can't measure them with scientific instruments. So the science is never going to be able to handle that in a way. It's you've got to experience it.
That's right. It's an experiential thing. What do you say to skeptics? Have you had skeptics?
I ignore them, basically. Yeah. My family are mainly skeptics. No, I don't worry about skeptics. I'm happy for them to believe. I was a skeptic when I was younger, and I'm happy for them to be that way. That's not a problem.
So I guess the foundation of your work is that people have these entity attachments, and they block the person from progressing. And have you heard of Emanuel Swedenborg? He lived in the 1600s, and he talked about that too. Like he really, he's a scientist as well as a theologist, and he had a diary, and he wrote about. He observed himself and how these thought forms turned his head to look at something really disgusting, even though he didn't want to, and cravings that he knows that he doesn't really want that thing, but he had these cravings, and he was aware that there was some entity attachment to him. Have you heard of him?
I have heard of him, and I've read a little bit about him. I read one, Heaven and Hell, I think. I read that book, and I also read Life on Other Worlds, or most of it. I haven't finished it, actually. It's still remaining unfinished on my shelf at the moment. But so I know a little bit about him, yes.
What's that one about, Life on Other Worlds?
That's about where the life on the planets of our solar system, and apparently a lot of the followers of Sweden, it says in the introduction anyway, that a lot of the followers of Swedenborg are a bit embarrassed by that book, because there's obviously no life on these planets. But there isn't any physical life as we know it, but I think there's plenty of life there, and I think I've read information elsewhere that the life on those surrounding or connected with those planets in a non-physical form is unique to each one of the planets, and we actually, between our lives on Earth, go to one of those planets where we learn certain things to prepare us for our next life on planet Earth here, and for our next incarnation. And that's why certain planets are connected with certain ideas, like Venus is connected with love, and I forget what the others are. And
Mars with war.
Yeah, and action, and Jupiter's with, I forget what they are now, but they've all got their characteristics, and that's apparently from ancient times they understood some about this sort of thing, like civilizations in the past that were quite advanced on planet Earth knew all this, you see, and Swedenborg tapped into this, but people were happy to understand that there might be dark places you can go in hell, but they weren't so happy about thinking that might be life on other planets in a non-physical form, you see.
It doesn't make sense to, they're both, just as etheric as each other. Yes. So, I think we're probably in
in the Western world anyway, I think we're probably in a process for a lot of people are of expanding that understanding of the nature of life, and not just restricting it to thoughts of physical form, but understanding that life is much, can take a non-physical form, and in fact the universe is full of it. And it's not a rare thing. The physical form, such as us, I think, is the rare thing. And we consider that the norm, but maybe it's the exception.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, because often I think when I don't know about you, but sometimes when I let my thoughts go and let it play, and I often think about flying, or I think about all these fantastic sort of events, and I can feel the excitement, and I feel like I'm actually experiencing it, and I think, oh no, that's just imagination. But why do I go off in that sort of imagination? And sometimes I just think that what is the real reality if you can have that and really experience that?
So maybe you have really experienced that in the past. And you've come down here to learn something a little bit more prosaic.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, probably.
I think being on Earth is largely about learning to handle emotions, to tell you the truth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Actually, that would make sense. It's just such a huge range of emotions, and it's so intense.
Yep. And I found that when I've worked with extraterrestrials that are doing illegal things on Earth, by putting implants in people without telling them, that they have, when I address them and talk to them about it, they have very little emotional feeling. They don't seem to ever express feelings of anything except fear. I think fear might be universal.
Okay. What about curiosity? Is that an emotion, or is that
well, I don't know. I suppose it's but quite often the people I meet aren't all that curious anyway. It's just a job for them.
Oh, okay.
They're not the higher ups I'm talking to.
Yes. Okay.
The workers that the workers that go out and do the work out off site, sort of thing. Yeah.
And you sense fear in them?
Well, when I threaten to not let them go home.
Oh, yeah.
If they don't stop, then they shape up, But prior to that, just they don't care about what they're doing to people down here.
Yeah.
No empathy at all.
Yes.
So they have a bit for themselves, but not for anyone else.
Yes.
So I wonder. It just makes, I might be wrong here, but I just wonder if they come here partly to learn about that. Just saying. Yeah. But they're doing it the wrong way. They're doing it the wrong way. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, we can go down a whole different subject there. So just bringing it back to the work that you do, you're doing a talk on the 25th of May in Melbourne at Abbotsford, at the Abbotsford Convent, and you're talking about the nature of entities and their attachment to human beings. That sounds really interesting.
Yep.
And you'll be doing a workshop on accessing your higher self.
Yes.
3-hour workshop.
Yep.
On the 26th.
And I'll be showing people exactly, giving them techniques for doing that, and some experience doing that, and also helping them understand some of the resistance that they will experience because people think, oh, what a great idea, and then when they start doing it, they suddenly find there's a bit of resistance there, And you've got to overcome that too. So I can help them with that, get them started with overcoming that, and understanding that it will arise and why it will arise. You see. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds really, empowering, and having us to be aware a lot about ourselves every day. And
so there's a lot of people now trying to practice mindfulness, but it's a hard thing to keep going. Whereas if you become mindful to listen to the part of your mind that's in touch with your source, it's a much more practical thing to do. It's like if you say, I just want you to be aware, that's hard. But if you say, I want you to be aware of your hand in front of your face, that's easy. While your hand's there. So if you say, I want you to be mindful, oh, that's hard. But if you say, I want you to be mindful, listen to your higher self, that's a practical thing, you know, and you can build on that.
Okay.
And eventually that can become a habitual connection, and then your life is going to change.
Wow, sounds very fascinating. I look forward to it, Brett.
Good.
Thank you, Brett. I think we'll stop there. But if you want to find more and interact with Brett, do come and join us at the Real Ghostbusters of Australia conference. We are doing activities from Friday to the Sunday, from the 24th to the 26th of May, starting with a ghost tour on the Friday night, and then Saturday conference and networking, and then Sunday the workshops. To find out more, go to www.melbourneevents.net. So that's melbourneevents.net, and you will find all the information there. All right, thanks Brett. Thanks very much for this interview.
Thanks, Joy. Pleasure talking with you.
Thank you. Bye.